Hello and welcome to episode 101 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco, and regular listeners will be expecting another voice there saying I'm Tarek, but Tarek is not for the first time away on holiday as I have to record this intro and outro to the podcast. It's funny how it's always him that gets to go away on holiday and I'm left to do this. But what that does give me the opportunity to do, and not embarrass him by doing so, is talk about briefly Tarek's new book, which is just out. It's called Follow Me to the Edge, and it's a really dark crime novel set in his fictional town of Cooper, Nebraska. His first book, Welcome to Cooper, was a huge hit. It was on the Amazon bestseller lists. And this one is set in the same universe, I guess, but it's a prequel to that previous book. I would highly recommend going and checking it out. Because it's, if you like your crime novels as a sort of slow burn, dark with loads of character and not many nice people, then they are great books to pick up. So his absence allows me to plug that without embarrassing him, and I hope he doesn't mind that I've done that. But back to the podcast. As I say, this is episode 101. Last week was our special 100th episode, which was an interview with Ian Rankin, which you can not only listen to, but also watch on YouTube. We filmed that in our producer Tim's studio. So that was a really great opportunity for us to speak to a writer of Ian's calibre, and we really enjoyed the episode, and it's been great getting some good feedback on that as well. So if you haven't checked that out, please do so. Please also check out the previous guests that we've had in the other 99 episodes. There's lots of authors, screenwriters, comic writers, video game writers, journalists, comedians, so all giving their hints and tips and hearing how they got into the industry. So definitely worth checking those out if you haven't already. And before I introduce this week's guest, I just wanted to also remind you that we have a competition running to coincide with our 100th episode. We're giving away to 3 winners some books from our previous guests, along with a signed copy of Ian Rankin and William McIlvanney's The Dark Remains, and also a signed Page One notebook that's signed by Ian Rankin, which is the writer's notebook that we've designed and sell on our website. And a further 2 people will win another signed Page One notebook. So all of the rules about how you enter that can be found on our social media on the post talking about the competition. So please just go and check one of those out and enter, and you'll have a chance to win a great prize. But on to this week's episode, we have, of course, got another great guest for you. This week we had the great opportunity to chat with Georgia Pritchett, who is a brilliant screenwriter. She started out, as she tells us, in radio, and then moved on to comedy sketch shows such as Spitting Image, Smith & Jones, started writing for Joe Brand, and then became one of Armando Iannucci's most trusted screenwriters, I suppose, working on The Thick of It first, and then in a big way on Veep. And most recently, she's been working on the brilliant Succession, which, is obviously one of the best shows on TV at the moment. And just having someone that's worked on all of these great shows is incredible. On top of that, she just was the showrunner on the Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd show on Apple TV called The Shrink Next Door. And we chat to her about that and what that was like as an experience. And also chat to her about her upcoming projects as well, which she's working on, along with, of course, writing the next season of Succession. So it's a really great episode, and Georgia was full of great hints and tips, and it was a lot of fun to record it. So I'll get straight into the episode after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then I'll be back very briefly at the end just to let you know about next week's guest. The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read. or that amazing drama you just watched? What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer? Because I know that in your family, there's a history of writing there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very lucky in that way, in that it's, I come from a family where it's considered a proper job, because I know lots of people don't. But yes, I think that is literally probably the only thing I've never been confused about, is that I want to be a writer. And even before I could write, I would sort of speak stories into a tape recorder. They were pretty much all stories about budgies who'd fallen out of their nest and couldn't find their way home. It's a niche genre, and it hasn't taken off in the way I'd hoped, but one day it will be recognised. So yeah, and then I remember I got a typewriter when I was about 10, and I immediately wrote a kind of no holds barred coruscating biography of my hamster, who
very pet focused, your early writing.
Very pet focused, yes, and indeed still is very pet focused. My hamster, like all my pets, devoted an enormous amount of time and energy into trying to get away from me, and he was the sort of Douglas Bader of the rodent world, and had basically done these audacious escapes. So I wrote about him. And yeah, so thankfully I did know that's what I wanted to do, and thankfully I had no other skills, so I didn't have another option really. So it wasn't so much a choice as just the one thing that I could have a go at.
I've been reading your book lately, which I've just about finished, and I'm absolutely loving. And I got the impression that your granddad in particular was quite a kind of big inspiration to you. And the bit I quite like the bit when you talk about how when you wrote these short stories, he would write his, and then you would kind of pass each other your work, and then you would tell him what you thought of it, and he would tell you what you thought of yours. Is that quite a big? It must be quite a nice big moment to have.
Yeah, I think it was. Yes, he was a proper writer and wrote sort of short stories and novels and literary criticism, and I think he was an influence in that I saw, when I went to his house, I saw that writing kind of was such a solace and such a kind of escape, and brought him such kind of peace and contentment and fulfillment. And he wrote every single day, and I definitely have that same sort of compelling need to write every day, and it's definitely something I that's a solace to me as well. And yeah, I mean, I realized pretty quickly I couldn't be a writer like him. I can't really write prose. I don't know enough adjectives, and I don't like describing things at all. I'm sort of yeah, I just feel, well, I don't know what that looked like. It's too much of a responsibility to say. So yeah, it was so I knew I couldn't do that. And I also, my dad was a journalist, and I realized, well, I can't do that because I don't care about facts, although these days, hey. So yeah, I was a bit at a loss, kind of having this drive to write, but kind of thinking I don't know what to do. And so when I hit upon the thought of doing scripts and just sort of focusing on dialogue, that was a very happy day for me, when I thought, yeah, I love dialogue, and I love watching TV and listening to radio, and that's something I can really embrace and be excited about exploring.
And was it a step into radio? Was that your first sort of real step into the world of writing?
Yeah, I mean, it's still a great place to start, but back when I started, there were a couple of shows that you could just submit material to. Anyone could, and there was one in particular called Weekending, which was kind of sketches about the week's news, where anyone could turn up at the BBC, and there'd be like an hour-long meeting with the producer where they'd say which kind of news items they'd be covering, and then you kind of all rushed home and wrote sketches and typed them up and brought them in the next day, and a lot of the people there were just sort of people who'd come in to keep warm and have a biscuit. And then there were other people there who like me, were sort of trying to learn their craft. And yeah, it was a great way to start. Fantastic, very sort of democratic process, where they just picked what they thought were the best things they'd got that week. It was a really good way to learn.
Is there anything like that now? Any sort of, it seems much harder.
Yeah, that's a really good question. As I say, I feel like radio still does give people a good start. And I suppose these days, with, YouTube and TikTok and everything online, you can sort of write and film or record your own stuff so easily and upload it, that's maybe the kind of closest equivalent that there is.
I suppose the only difference there would be that you're sort of launching it into an abyss and hoping it gets noticed by someone, as opposed to a sort of radio show when there were fewer radio stations and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, definitely the sort of plus point was that you knew that at 11 o'clock on a Friday night that show was going to go out, whether it had a joke of yours in it or not. So you could sort of sit with your stopwatch by the radio, because depending on how much material you got in, that was how much money you'd have. So you'd find out on a Friday if you could afford to eat. I suppose, you were limited to what the BBC thought was a sort of good version of a satirical sketch, whereas there's more freedom, if you're just uploading stuff. But as you say, there's a gazillion things being uploaded every second, so it is kind of just taking that leap of faith that someone will see it.
And I'd imagine having that, that tight 24-hour window to say, right, here's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Get your jokes in by X PM the next day. That must have been a really good learning experience into how to turn around stuff quickly.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And of course, you learn as much when you don't get stuff in. You learn, when you hear what they did choose instead of yours, that's incredibly helpful and informative. You think, oh, I see, they went for, you can sort of work out why they chose something else over yours, and then you can sort of adjust what you submit the following week. So yeah, so it's a really sort of intensive kind of learning curve, because it's it's do or die basically. It's you can't, it's hit or miss. You can't nearly get something in. It's so it's pretty important that you learn the lessons each week if you don't get something in.
And from there, am I right in saying that you moved into TV? Did you move to Spitting Image?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I guess, having written for one kind of topical sketch show, then other sketch shows sort of invited me on. So as you say, Spitting Image and Smith and Jones and Rory Bremner and Joe Brand and shows like that. So then sort of opening out from strictly sort of news related sketches to more kind of general related sketches. So that was really great. And and also writing for Lenny Henry. I think writing for sketch shows and stand-ups is such a good way of learning, because it's so character based and it's so about sort of inhabiting the personality of that stand-up or those kind of characters on the sketch show, that it's really good training for when you're writing narrative, because you've sort of learnt all those skills already.
And it's not something that sorry Tarek, I was just going to say writing for comedians isn't something that people get credit for, really, is it? The comedian is always the one that is they're so funny, and it's sort of attributed, everything is attributed to that person. It's sort of the unsung hero of a writer or writing team behind them sometimes.
I guess that's never really bothered me. I think I sort of love the anonymity of it, and I love kind of having to develop that sort of chameleon like skill of 1 minute you're Lenny Henry and the next minute you're Ronnie Corbett and the next minute you're Joe Brand. I think that's, and when they have their own TV shows, I think everyone knows they have writers, and I'd much rather be hiding in the background than on screen. So I've always been very happy with that setup.
And you have a bit in your book when you talk about getting a phone call from Ronnie Corbett, and he'd asked you to write some jokes for him, and you met him in a lay-by and handed over an envelope of jokes for an envelope of cash. And is that how most of them pay for the jokes? Was that a bit unusual?
Very shady, yes. I felt like so gangster. That's probably the closest I'll
I
ever
imagine
get
I'm counting the jokes
gangster
before he hands over the money to make sure there's enough there.
Yeah, I think because he, at that time, although he did then go back to TV, but when he was just kind of touring and stuff, it wasn't being paid for by a show or a production. So yeah, he was paying himself. So yeah, we'd swap envelopes, and he was great. I learned a lot from him. He was really incredible performer.
And when you were sort of breaking through doing all of this work, it was a time when there weren't many women writers getting the opportunity at that point. I mean, how did that feel? Was that intimidating, or was it easy? How did that feel for you?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't easy. I think being the only woman always, and also the only person who hadn't gone to Oxford or Cambridge, was hard. And I think I say in the book, I didn't have to worry about imposter syndrome because I was an imposter and was treated like that. So it was tough, but on the other hand, it's all I knew. So, and I love all the men that I've worked with. That's great, and I just kind of thought, this will change soon. But of course, it was 25 years before I ever got to sit in a writer's room with another woman, and that indeed was in America. So yeah, we've still got a way to go. But yeah, it's tough being outnumbered, but yeah, I think things are slowly changing,
because it seems like it was a difficult time for both for women who are both performing and writing, in the whole industry, really. There's a bit about Joe Brand, and I have to say, I didn't realize until recently that, as Marco said, that people wrote the jokes for the people who say them on stage. And it's a bit about Jo Brand and the fact that she kind of would always start off with a joke. She wanted a joke at the start of her set about her weight because she thought it was better to preempt that rather than have someone shout something from her from the audience. And I just got this impression that it was a pretty miserable time at times for women.
I
Both
think
in front
it was
and,
really tough. I mean,
backstage.
she wrote a huge amount of her, particularly her stand-up. But yeah, I think it was really tough to be a performer or a writer then. I think what's been good recently is that female writer performers have done really well. And I think the sort of sad thing is that's come from a kind of place of discrimination, in that people like Michaela Cole or Phoebe Waller-Bridge or Sharon Horgan have kind of thought, hang on a minute, I'm not really getting very interesting roles. I'll write one myself. But the good news is when they do, and when it's put on TV, it's incredible. And, you know, and it just makes you think, oh, we have to hear from more diverse voices, because it's just so fantastic and so enriching to everyone, not just to women, but, you know, what incredible shows those people have written, and how brilliant that we've all been able to see them.
But it's that kind of line that, you know, women can't be as funny as men. And I remember folks saying that line when I was younger, going to see stand-ups and stuff. And that seems like still a very modern view. But I mean, I think you're right. It definitely is going away as we see these kind of women-fronted shows making an impact. But it's amazing how until fairly recently, it didn't seem like there was that much of there's still a lot of kind of hang-ups or old-fashioned thinking about it all.
Definitely, for sure. Yeah, it's so interesting as well that, I mean, this is like a much longer conversation, but, you know, I think the States have kind of proved themselves to be pretty sexist in the last 5 years or so. But they just don't have those sort of hang-ups. And, you know, right from the beginning of sitcoms, they've had women in the leads like Lucille Ball and Mary Tyler Moore and Rhoda and Roseanne and Ellen and countless others, and that just isn't something we've done. And I don't entirely understand the sort of psychology of that, but it's just comedy has been such a sort of male dominated arena right from the beginning, and the women have always been the kind of sensible girlfriends or wives providing the setup lines while the men did the punchlines. And it's amazing how long that's taken to, you know, begin to change. It's
that thing about, you know, as a kid, what can you see people doing? Can you aspire to be that person? I suppose it's the same, you know, with race in America and things like that. These opportunities are opening out more now because they're being given more opportunities, and then the system is almost surprised that things like that work in a strange because the system's so biased the other way. But exactly. It's interesting. But I was going to ask you then, went to, or at some stage after that, you went to work with Armando Iannucci. You did The Thick of It, and then obviously on to Veep. And what was it like working on those shows, which are so legendary as comedy shows?
Yeah, I mean, he's amazing, isn't he? I was terrified when I was thrilled when he asked me to work on The Thick of It, but also terrified. And I remember on the first day I turned up on set to write on The Thick of It, and he sort of said, right, we're doing this inquiry episode, and the vibe I'm going for is sort of less Chilcott, more Leveson. And I just thought, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I was just so panic stricken. And I thought Chilcott was a lovely spa. And we used to film The Thick of It in this horrible sort of abandoned office building that was freezing and in the middle of nowhere. And it had no Wi-Fi, so I couldn't even Google what the hell is Chilcott. So I did sort of have one of those moments where I kind of thought, shall I just run and keep running and never come back? But I kind of had to calm myself down and say, look, I understand the word inquiry. So there's going to be an inquiry, and I know that these characters will be, you know, very concerning for them. And I also know that they're very likely to lie. And, you know, I think often when you write characters lying is when you kind of get to their truth. So I just sort of thought, well, I'll just kind of write what I know, and I feel terrified. I can channel that into the scenes I write. And so, yeah, it worked out okay. But yeah, it was a pretty scary first day being thrown in the deep end.
And that's on the process side of things. For how does, you know, how did an episode of The Thick of It come together in terms of the writers? Was there, you know, was there a sort of scenario you're given and then you have to fill in the blanks, as it were?
Yeah, exactly. We'd sort of come up with scenarios, and Armando would often sort of have a very clear idea of what he wanted. And then what's so lovely is it is a sort of genuinely collaborative process. And so Armando sort of talks in terms of making gravy, the metaphor of making gravy, because you all add to each other's scripts and you all kind of pass it around. So he might say, you know, we need an alternative for this line, and you'll write kind of 4 suggestions, and then the next writer will write another 4 or 5, and then you'll all go out, and in the end you'll have kind of 50 or 60 suggestions for one line. And the good thing about that is you get to a place you would never have got to on your own, because you are inspired by other people's suggestions who've been inspired by other people's suggestions. So his sort of metaphor is, you know, when you're making a gravy, you may throw in a carrot or an onion, and then at the end you might not see your carrot or onion, but it, you know, it's an integral part of the gravy.
The flavor. Yeah,
exactly. And that's kind of his thing of saying, if when you see the show go out, that joke is not the one you'd written, like, don't worry, because your joke sort of contributed towards the final joke. And I think we all definitely felt that. And it, you know, again, that was another really good learning experience. And I say in my book that I, by sheer fluke, thought of an incredibly funny joke, which sadly I can't remember what it was, but trust me, 12 years ago I thought of a really good joke, and and I said it, and he said, no, that's not right, that's too funny. And I remember thinking, is that possible in comedy? But he sort of explained, and he was absolutely right, that there was this moment where Roger Allam's character, Peter Mannion, sort of got caught by the press, and he was saying he'd be too panic stricken to come up with a joke. It would be much funnier if he just sort of makes word-shaped noise and just says as many words as he can without actually making any sense. And so we did that, and it was much funnier. And again, that was like a really good lesson, because you think, so tempting when you think of a good joke to just bung it in, but if it doesn't sort of serve the character or the story, then, you know, you really should cut it out. It's important to be ruthless. And yeah, so that was a good lesson.
And then how did the writer's room in Veep compare to that? Because am I right in saying that the Veep writer's room, you moved to America kind of midway through? So did that shift from being a kind of British feel to an American feel? Yeah,
it was really interesting. So the first 4 seasons of Veep were Armando and his sort of British writers, and we wrote it in London, and it was filmed in Baltimore. And then after 4 seasons, he'd been away so much he needed to come home. And so he handed over to this American showrunner called Dave Mandel, who'd kind of come from Seinfeld and stuff. And then Dave Mandel set up a sort of proper American writer's room in LA, and the whole production was then written in LA and filmed in LA. They had to sort of drive our Oval Office across the country very slowly and put it in LA. And so that was amazing, to be in a proper kind of American writer's room with like 12 of my heroes who'd written Seinfeld and The Simpsons and Friends and everything I'd ever loved. So yeah, that was another kind of terrifying but exhilarating experience.
Is the process different in an American writer's room then?
I think it is, and a lot of that's financial. You know, they've got the money, they've got such huge audience potential, and they've got the money to employ a lot of writers to come in every day for a long time, and we don't have that luxury over here. But yeah, so a big writers' room, and you know, just showrunners have different kind of processes, and I think Armando's someone who gets a script out quite quickly and then will sort of rewrite, whereas Dave Mandel was much more lots and lots of storylines and keep rewriting the storyline, and when that's absolutely exactly as he wants it, then you kind of do a draft, and you don't do that many drafts. So it's sort of the opposite, but obviously both work. It's just whatever works for the showrunner.
And is there, because obviously a writer gets credited, one of the writers will tend to get credited with an episode, but presumably the whole writers' room is contributing to that particular episode.
So generally you're sort of involved in the outlining of each episode, and then, as you say, one person will get given that episode to write, and they'll write the script, and they'll write a few drafts, or if you're with Armando, dozens of drafts, and then everyone will sort of, as they say, punch it up or add alternative jokes. So it's good. You feel, I think the good thing about that is you feel kind of emotionally invested in every episode, and that there isn't that sort of feeling of, oh, I'll save that good joke for my episode, because everyone is involved in every episode, and you get to kind of other people make you look good with their contributions, and you get to kind of put your ideas and jokes into their script. So it's very, when it's working, it's a brilliant way to work.
And from then you've been working on Succession. I know you're working on season 4 right now, and you're kind of breaking that down. But I did wonder how did that come around? How did the show come around? Because I know most of the writers are British, despite it being an incredibly American feeling show. Like, I didn't realize until after the first season that it was written by folk based in the UK. I assumed it was American, and I kind of wondered why that was and how that came about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I mean, yes, no, everyone was very surprised that the first 4 seasons of Veep were completely British writers. Mm-hmm. And then similarly, Succession, the sort of core group that started Succession, were basically a group of British comedy writers, kind of shambolic, scruffy comedy writers. And I think there was some concern from some quarters, could this sort of mumbling bunch of socially awkward people pull off a sort of glossy, high-end American drama? And you know, in some ways, no, we couldn't, because they had to get lots of experts, and in particular, they had to get a rich consultant, because none of us knew what it was like to be rich. So I remember in season 1, I wrote an episode about the Thanksgiving that the family have, and I remember the rich consultant really took me to task, because I think at one moment I had Marsha saying, you know, lunch is ready, or it's turkey or something. They're like, she would never stoop so low as to even know where the kitchen was, and then and I had a thing saying the maids served the food, you know, or women wearing maids uniforms served the food, and they were like, where on earth did you get the idea that there would be maids in maids outfits? And I was like, I mean, it's got to be either porn or racist Tom and Jerry episode. I don't know. But apparently rich people don't have maids. They have very handsome young men in chinos and polo T-shirts serving. And then they were like, you know, rich people don't wear coats because they go from their car to their jet to their building, and their shoes only ever walk on carpet. They never walk on ground. And it was a real learning curve.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And Succession, obviously, yeah, it's a drama, but there's obviously a lot of comedy in there, and it's about a bunch of terrible people ultimately, but as a viewer, you sympathize. I don't know if sympathize is the right word. You empathize with the different characters at certain times. Is there any danger of creating too much empathy for these sorts of characters?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, at first, I sort of, when Jesse mentioned it to me, I thought, I don't know if I want to write for a bunch of horrible white men who are destroying democracy in the world. And then I thought, oh, well, it'd be interesting. And in fact, it has been really interesting because you have to dig so deep and sort of and really try to create these fully rounded human beings who have sort of damage and flaws, and that's been very exciting to do that. But I agree, I think there are times where I kind of, perhaps, if Jesse doesn't keep me in check, I go a bit frenzy and have them sort of learning from their mistakes and becoming nicer people. And Jesse has to keep saying, no, that's no good. You can't decide Roman's sweet, really. He's a horrible person. And, he's not going to change. So, yeah, I think it is sort of finding that line of sort of showing, look, these people are wildly privileged, but they're also incredibly damaged, and they've suffered sort of emotional neglect and emotional abuse, and they've got all these problems that they'll never really be able to address or overcome. So it's just kind of trying to depict that in sort of accurately without kind of doing any wish fulfillments in the writing and sort of making them suddenly change and become Mother Teresa or something.
Yeah. Is it a show that could have been made that couldn't have been made until kind of now? It feels like a kind of show where you've got, as Marco says, these kind of horrible people, but you still kind of root for them almost in a way, and it feels like a kind of much more complicated relationship the viewer has with the character than, I kind of imagine that kind of show 10, 20 years ago would be much more straightforward, and they're horrible people and maybe they're being investigated, and it'd be more of a kind of, will they get caught?
You'd probably have a nice guy character.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, whereas it's much more, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose they had like Sopranos, didn't they, all that time ago, and that was like
I suppose that's true. Yeah.
Sort of groundbreaking. Oh, these people are human beings with families, and in a way, it's like that. But I think perhaps we are sort of, as a world, perhaps a bit more knowledgeable about the people who are controlling the world and the media and the messages that get out there. And so perhaps you're right that we did need to get to a place where people are beginning to be aware of how much they are being manipulated and how much the media is being manipulated, and what is the truth and whose version of the truth are we getting, and that kind of thing.
And when you're, obviously it is a drama, and does that affect the ability in terms of how far you can push? Veep had great stories, but comedy was at the forefront of Veep, whereas with Succession, I would say the drama's at least level with the comedy in terms of what the story it's trying to tell. Does that affect the writing process? Does it change, for example, how much the writers are having to change stuff nearer the shooting scene and things like that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think what the difference is, and why in a way it's been good having so many comedy writers on it, is that often, well, this is a sweeping generalization, but sometimes in dramas, it's so plot driven, and I suppose at an extreme level, something like 24 is just all plot, isn't it?
Yeah.
So to sort of tackle something where actually you strip out a lot of plot, and it's really all about the kind of much more about the dialogue and the relationships of the characters, which is more kind of where comedy tends to sit. That I think it's sort of found a kind of quite a happy sort of marriage between those two elements of it. And yeah, with Veep, well, I was about to say it was much more sort of extreme, but then of course reality overtook it. And I mean, it's not the worst thing Trump did, but he did put an end to Veep because, you know,
you couldn't do that show anymore, could you?
Yeah, we really couldn't. And we, you know, our fictional president was sort of a horrible, ruthless, lying monster. But she had a sense of shame, and we kind of punished her when she did bad things. And suddenly that seemed incredibly twee and old-fashioned just overnight. So it was like, oh, we can't do that anymore. So we had to finish that there. But I did enjoy, by the way, people post it online every so often, don't they, that Scottish newspaper report of the election where it said Scottish golf club owner or something. It's so good.
And I also wanted to ask about Shrink Next Door, which is your kind of latest show, and that's your own show. You're the showrunner, the creator. You know, and it's been adapted. It's a true story based on the podcast. And for those that haven't watched it, it's Will Ferrell is a client of Paul Rudd, who's a psychiatrist, and it's about their. I mean, I finished watching it not too long ago, and it's a fantastic show. And I thought Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd are brilliant. It's Paul Rudd especially. They both are very, very different than anything I've seen them in before. You know, it was really refreshing to see them playing these parts. Yeah. And I was chatting with my wife about it as we were watching, and I said, I don't know if this is a show that I could say I'm enjoying, because it was so stressful and the anxiety was just building every episode. And it kind of gets the two of them have this relationship, and it goes to a point where you think, if this wasn't a true story, you say this is just gone too far, it's nonsense. But it's such a fantastic story. And I mean, how did that come about? And what was it like being a showrunner?
Yeah, I mean, that was great. I love doing that. And it is an incredible story. I did actually have to sort of tone it down to make it vaguely believable. So, so it was this fantastic podcast called The Shrink Next Door. And funnily enough, both Will Ferrell heard it and was trying to get the rights to play Marty, the patient, at the same time as Paul Rudd had heard it and was trying to get the rights and wanted to play the psychiatrist Ike. Wow. So then they kind of joined forces and bought the rights, and then they asked people to sort of pitch for it. And I'd been a big fan of the podcast, and it felt like a sort of natural progression, because as you spotted, I've sort of carved out this niche of writing for pretty appalling characters. But in very specific worlds, like the world of politics or the worlds of business, which are kind of cutthroat and ruthless. And I thought, well, this is an interesting opportunity to write about these two people, and it's just about their relationship. There's no kind of politics or business to sort of distract or to hide behind. It's all just about feelings. And I think a lot of people sort of, I understand, approached it as a kind of like a goody baddie story, or a sort of villain victim. And my approach, perhaps because I'm now learned to show compassion to my horrible characters, was, look, this is almost like a love story. This is a relationship that lasted 27 years. And I think it's too simple and reductive to say, well, Marty was a fool or a gullible idiot and Ike was an evil manipulator. Let's just try not to blame or judge either man, and just try and work out how this happened, and also acknowledge that it could actually happen to any of us. We've all been in unhealthy relationships, whether it's with family or friends or romantic ones. And it's always really hard to spot when something that's been good changes into something not good. And so I think that's sort of what appealed to me. And I think, as you say, Will and Paul and Catherine Hahn are just incredible in it. And my approach was, people will think this is a comedy, but I'm going to sort of subvert expectations. And it's actually really a tragedy. And what's been so interesting for me is that sort of half the people have watched it and be like, oh, this isn't what I was expecting. And then the other half have been like, this isn't what I was expecting. So I don't know how clever it is to subvert expectations, but I did think their performances were absolutely brilliant and heartbreaking. And as you say, it's a great story.
And you were the showrunner on that show.
Yeah.
So I mean, what does that involve on a day-to-day basis as compared to being just in the writer's room?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a pretty much an impossible job to do, I would say, because it's being in charge of the scripts and the writing, but then it's essentially being, I suppose, what in Britain we would call being a producer. So you're in charge of hiring everyone and kind of crewing up and interviewing all the sort of editors, composers, casting, costume, makeup, every single aspect of it. And it's that's a lot of different areas to try and become an expert in very quickly. So all I did was try and find people I trusted and trusted their opinion. If you find a great costume designer, then trust their opinions on what they think people should be wearing, because it's probably someone who's been doing it for 20 years is going to have better ideas than someone who's just started thinking about it a few weeks ago. So I think it's a matter, as so often in life, sort of getting the right people around you. And I really enjoyed it. I was nervous, but I really enjoyed the experience.
Do you take a step back? Sorry, Terry.
No, sorry.
Do you take a step back from the writing as much if you're having to handle all these other things?
No, because I suppose that comes first. So first you do the writer's room and get all the scripts ready, and then you sort of move into production and sort of are in charge of making it happen, and that's a lot of responsibility. And also we filmed during COVID, so that was sort of extra responsibility and lots of protocols. And it was challenging, but I think everyone had just been locked away on their own for so long that they were so delighted to be back at work, even if they were triple masked and standing 10 feet away from each other. I think we were all kind of just enjoying being around other human beings.
And it is interesting you say that you kind of locked down the scripts before you went into production proper, because I remember being surprised when I found out a while back, and it's probably maybe old-fashioned now, but it was terms of big US shows that had like 24, when they had like 24 episodes and stuff, and they'd still be writing the end of the season as we're filming the start of it. And I always thought that must be so stressful to try and have that kind of ticking clock catching up to you.
That's sometimes evident in the series.
Yeah, you can absolutely, you can tell. And so it makes much more sense to me to lock things down, because you know where you're aiming for and you can set things up.
Exactly. And particularly for Shrink Next Door, which is like a limited series with 8 episodes, and that's it. But though you're right, I think anything like Succession is 10 episodes. I think you can kind of just about keep those in your head. But those sort of studio audience sitcoms that do kind of 22 episodes a series, which is much more like a sort of factory kind of production line, I think that's another reason people over there get paid a lot more, is that you do basically just burn out every couple of years and have to lie down for 6 months.
And obviously you've recently written your book, My Mess is a Bit of a Life. What made you want to turn to writing that at this stage?
I mean, I didn't. It's all slightly horrifying to me that it's happened. I remember someone suggesting that I write it, and I laughed scornfully and said, the one thing we can be very sure of in this life is that I will never, ever write a memoir. And then seem to have done exactly that. I don't know if it was a terrible lapse in judgment or a moment of lockdown madness, but yeah, suddenly having happily put words in other people's mouths and enjoyed the anonymity of it all, I've now written something very personal and direct, and yeah, it's horrifying.
I mean, it's definitely one of the few books I've read that's made me laugh out loud as I'm reading it, because I think it's much harder to do that in a book than it is when you're watching something on TV. And so I was reading it this morning in a coffee shop, and I was just laughing. It's very, very, very funny. And how did you find the writing process of the book compared to writing script? You know, was it? I mean, it sounds like it must have been harder to try and get in your own headspace as opposed to other people's.
Yeah, I think it definitely was. And I think what made it kind of possible in the end, as I said earlier, I'm sort of kind of phobic about writing prose. So in a way, I mean, it's a series of, well, they're saying vignettes, which is a posh word of saying very short chapters. But I think I just sort of embraced my limitations as a writer, and I've got a very short attention span, and I think after so many years of script writing, my brain just frames things in scenes, really. So in a way, it's like a sort of collection of scenes from my life, and so there's a lot of economy there, and not much description, and just getting to the points of various moments in my life. And so I think that's how I kind of tackled it, almost as like, I can't write this happened and then this and then this, but I can sort of create a kind of a whole sort of range of scenes that hopefully kind of encapsulate what it was like.
And when you were doing that, did you know, did the writing of one scene sort of spark another scene that you hadn't previously thought, oh, write that, but did it sort of spark off itself? And
yeah, it did actually. I think that's, I'm really interested by how memory works, and that once you kind of start remembering stuff, other doors open to other memories. And I also wanted to be true to that kind of sort of fragmentary nature of memory and the sort of impressionistic nature of it, and not kind of do that thing that people sometimes do of sort of imbuing my younger self with sort of any adult sensibility or hindsight, just sort of represent it as I experienced it then, which, you know, so often you just sort of witness something or observe something and you don't really get the bigger picture or the significance. And so, I tried to kind of be true to that. And so hopefully that's more sort of interesting. The reader has to kind of join the dots in a way.
Mm-hmm. And was it nice, the kind of more solitary process of writing as opposed to being in a writer's room? I mean, is that something you quite enjoyed?
Yeah, I do like both. I like being on my own writing, but I definitely also, you know, as you say, we're back in the writer's room for Succession, and at first I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to get dressed and put shoes on. I've done that for 2 years. But it's definitely good, I think, to have some human interaction. So I do like a combination of both, but it's hard writing a book, and I don't know how you two felt, but, you know, it is so much. It's more reassuring when you can kind of bounce off someone else and say, what do you think of this? And it feels scary just writing a book on your own. It's you're just left with your own self-doubt and self-loathing. Nobody else.
And we have to ask you, of course, about your trip to the White House with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and about the actual Veep as well, Biden at the time. I mean, what was that like? I mean, it sounded like it was a lot of fun from reading.
Yeah, I mean, it was just extraordinary. It was like a weird sort of cheese dream or something when you had a rich dinner too late. We had to film this sort of sketch for the correspondence dinner when Obama was president, which involved taking our sort of fictional vice president, as she was then, to the real vice president, which was Biden at the time. And we did a kind of Ferris Bueller's Day Off sort of scenario, because everyone in Washington was at this correspondence dinner, but for security reasons, the vice president isn't allowed to go. So we kind of imagined that Biden and Julia sort of got up to all these hijinks. And it was just so bizarre to walk around the White House, having walked around the set of the White House on Veep, and really worrying how many people came rushing up and said, "Oh my God, it's so true to life." And you just sort of think, "Oh no, I thought it was a sort of awful exaggeration. Don't tell me it's lifelike."
That was the clue that Trump was about to happen, clearly.
Oh, I know, my God, yeah. And yeah, meeting Michelle Obama, who's like a huge hero of mine, was incredible. And yeah, it was a pretty amazing experience, which funny enough, there's been a few things in the press recently. I've accidentally caused an international incident by talking about how much Biden's mum, who was Irish, hated the English and the Queen. And that's just come out recently. And so, yeah, my dad was saying that, well, now you've ruined the special relationship between England and America. And so now when they're negotiating with Putin, it won't work. So basically World War III is your fault.
It's all your fault. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And looking forward, you obviously working on the next season of Succession. I think you're also working on Tunnel 29 and Galaxy Quest TV project. Do you want to tell us what you can about any of those?
It's tricky, isn't it? Succession's really fun, and I think it's going to be a good season. Tunnel 29 is another thing that was a fantastic podcast. A true story again about some engineering students who used their very rudimentary knowledge to build a tunnel under the Berlin Wall in the 60s and rescue people. So I'm really excited about that. Galaxy Quest is something I'm doing with Simon Pegg, who I'm a huge fan of. And then I'm hoping to write something for Julia again, because I loved working with her on Veep, and it would be great. We're trying to do something together which has a lot of women in it. And I don't often get to write for lots of women, so that will be really nice. I'm looking forward to that.
It would have been strange when you were working on Veep before it went to the US, working in the UK, but then did you spend much time with the actors, or was it quite standoffish?
Yeah, no, we did. I think what sort of was good for the show, but not necessarily good for us, was when it was filmed in Baltimore, always in the winter. Everyone, the actors, the crew, the writers, absolutely everyone was staying in this one hotel in Baltimore, and it was if you went outside, your face fell off because it was so cold. So we were all stuck inside this hotel, and so we were all homesick, and so we kind of got to know each other really well in a way that I think you don't usually on other shows. It was a bit like being in a sort of theatre rep. We're just all kind of together. And so I think that really helped the show. So even when it moved to LA, the fact that we'd all got to know each other so well, I think really made a difference to the show. And I would really like to work with Julia. She's so talented, and there's lots of women that we've both sort of worked with and thought, we want to kind of get them all together. So we're trying to create a show that will accommodate a lot of women, which will be fun.
Awesome. Excellent. Sounds great. What was the last book that you read?
I've got a terrible habit now. I think it's the pandemic where I keep starting lots of books at once. Do you do that? It's really...
Yeah, I can't. If I don't have one at a time, it takes me ages, and I can't remember what's going on in all of them.
Yeah.
So I'm bad for that.
But I'm reading a book called Hell of a Book, and it's a fantastic book. It's about a writer. It's all it's really fantastic. I'm loving it. And if only I could remember who wrote it. But who cares about writers? Am I right?
And what about the last film that you watched?
The last film I watched was the brilliant Parallel Mothers by Pedro Almodovar, which is really, really good. He's so good. I've seen quite a few films that I wasn't crazy about, and just like within a few minutes of this, you just have that lovely feeling of, oh, I'm in safe hands. This is going to be great. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. That's a great film.
Great.
Nice.
And last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Last TV show. I've been watching The Responder, which I'm really enjoying. And I'm crazy about This Way Up with Aisling Bea and Sharon Horgan.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Really good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then my sort of guilty watch, which the Succession writers got me into, is couples therapy, which is it's good for a good research for Succession. Just people being so awful to each other. It's just astonishing. But yeah, I don't really approve of reality TV because it's taking work away from us. But that is quite compelling, I must say.
And the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or. So I always say there's no right answers apart from one. So we'll start off with let's go for serious Will Ferrell or comedy Will Ferrell.
Oh, I'd say serious now I've experienced it.
Selena Meyer or Logan Roy?
Oh, Selena. I'm terrified of Logan.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Fancy restaurant or takeaway?
I think fancy restaurant because I miss going to fancy restaurants so much.
And last one, real book or ebook?
Oh, real.
That was the only one that mattered, and unfortunately that's the wrong answer.
Can't you see the bookshelves behind her?
Yeah, no, I should have known I was outnumbered. I'm desperately trying to find people who agree with ebook. I've kind of made this persona of someone who's an ebook person now, so I have to stick to it. So very few people are on my side so far, but that's fine.
I mean, I think there's room in this world for both. That's all I
no, well. Okay, so what's that point? That's a point each. I think that's a draw.
Yeah,
I'll take that. That's fine. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much to Georgia for coming on to the podcast. We really enjoyed recording that episode, and I hope she enjoyed coming on as well. She mentioned that she'd been reading a book called Hell of a Book, and she couldn't remember who the author was, but looking up online, it appears to be by Jason Mott. So she said it was great and funny, and that's enough of an endorsement for me. So yeah, I would go and check that one out. And of course, you can grab Georgia's own book, My Mess is a Bit of a Life, either online or at your favourite local bookshop. I'll also put a link in the podcast description to the little skit that she did for the White House Correspondents' Dinner that we talked to her about there. That's available on YouTube, so I'll put a link in the podcast description about that. Next week, we've got another great guest. We're speaking with the brilliant James Oswald, who is one of the UK's best-selling crime writers. He's the author of the Inspector McLean series, which is a crime series with a supernatural twist, I think it's fair to say. And he's also written some fantasy novels as well as some comics. So it's a really interesting interview with him as well, so I hope you're able to join us for that. Before we go, as ever, if you enjoyed the podcast, we really appreciate you taking the time to give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever your favourite podcast app is, and even leaving us a review. That would really helps us in terms of continuing to get great guests on the podcast. If you follow us on social media, you'll see that we've changed our social media handles. So this is normally where Tarek gets them wrong, so I'll try and get them right with the new one. So it's very easy now to follow us on social media, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram. We are at UK Page 1 on all of those, and you can get in touch by tweeting us or messaging us on one of those platforms if you want, or you can send us an email to podcast@writegear.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you, telling us about what you thought about the episode, or with suggestions for future guests. That's always useful as well. So have a great week, and we hope to see you next episode.